So we have already covered all of the base game weapon categories. Now we're actually going to work on to the DLC ones, starting off with the light greatswords, which is probably one of the more fun weapon types in the entire game, as they do offer you an amazing moveset. Not only is it really cool looking, but their combo potential is actually insane as well. It does have the ability to like seamlessly go in between heavy attacks into light attacks, where they actually start off with a charged heavy, uncharged heavy, a running heavy attack, or even a guard counter. Every single one of these double swiping attacks, you can just immediately go into the light attack combo chain. So these weapons are obviously going to pair very well with the multi-hit items, and they're going to output some of the highest like two-handed DPS in the entire game, as the movesets can be like just as fast as a straight sword, but their damage is going to be somewhat comparable to like a spear. Now it still actually gets the exact same stance damage as a straight sword with its light attacks. Now as for its charged heavy attack, it actually gets the same stance damage as a great sword, and actually is going to get like more damage too, because it's a double swiping attack, so you're hitting twice, which does make it have a slightly longer animation, but it's not that much longer than a great sword, and in fact it's actually quicker than like a spear heavy attack. Now that two-handed DPS is probably not going to go as high as things like axes, specifically like the warped axe, but it is going to offer you more range, get you a better moveset, and get you a lot better different Ash of War options. You get everything for poking attack skills and all these skills on these smaller types of weapons, but you also do get wing stance, which is definitely the best option to pair alongside the light greatswords. This is easily a top 5 Ash of War in the entire game, especially since the buff of the RELLANA'S cameo. To now, when you hold on to the skill for about a second, you get 45% boost to your damage, and this pairs especially well with wing stance, because you can keep comboing the light attack version over and over again, and as long as you keep holding onto this attack, you're never going to actually lose that buff until you actually end the combo. Because typically with regular stance-based skills, as soon as you use the attack once, that's it. You have to charge it up again to just gain the benefits. And this light attack combo of the wing stance can stun lock so many different types of enemies, output amazing damage, give you 15 stance damage for every single attack, and you can actually combo it into the heavy attack version, which is an insane lunging attack that goes really far, obviously doesn't consume much FP, do 30 stance damage, and do piercing damage. Like, this skill does everything that you really need it to do. It covers nice distance, it's really efficient, it's good at stance breaking, it can stun lock a lot of enemies. Like, almost any single time that you use the MILADY, you just use wing stance. Now for me, I think the most unfortunate part about the light greatswords are probably going to be its power stancing combos. When you compare it to other different types of like quicker dexterity types of weapons like straight swords, curved swords, or spears, it's not going to perform as well, as those combos do hit simultaneously, where for these ones, it does swing one at a time, meaning that it's going to have longer animations, and it's not going to output anywhere near as much DPS. I would just much rather have these things one-handed or two-handed, as they feel a lot more fluid, but they still actually offer you the exact same combos. You can combo those heavy attacks into the power stancing light attacks, and it does flow nicely. So it's still a very viable and good moveset, but I would just much rather have them two-handed, especially if you are going to go with the guard countering builds, because light greatswords do perform very well with guard counters, specifically with the deflecting tier, with how fast that it actually does come out, how quickly it can stun lock, and as I mentioned earlier, you can just combo it straight into the light attack. But for today, we are going to rank all of the light greatswords from worst to best, which unfortunately there is only 3, but thankfully at the very least all 3 of these are very decent. And do keep in mind, it's just going to be based on how useful they are and how well they perform in PvE. Now to start off with, at number 3, we have the LEDA'S sword, which is a split holy damaging light greatsword that actually does scale best off dexterity. I would like to call it a dex faith based weapon, but unfortunately its faith scaling is way too poor for it to be considered as such, especially because the skill actually does scale off AR as well, and for some reason it actually scales better off strength than it does faith, so this thing is actually more of a quality based weapon if anything. I don't really know why they're always so careful with a lot of these really cool looking weapons. This thing could have easily had a B scaling in both dexterity and faith, and the AR could have been a lot higher, because unfortunately this thing is the lowest damaging light greatsword, especially if you're going through the base game, because of that holy damage is not going to do you any favors with all the enemies that are resist to it. The weapon does get the generic light greatsword moveset, shares the exact same one as the MILADY. Not really much differences in like weight or range either, so the only thing really separating it is going to be its unique skill, Needle Piercer, which for 19 FP does shoot out this pretty quick projectile that tracks right towards the enemy, does an okay amount of damage, and surprisingly actually mostly does piercing damage and hardly does any holy damage at all. Like, the holy damage percentage is like less than 10%, and most of it is actually physical, which is honestly a good thing because piercing damage is obviously better than holy damage, but for some reason it's not really getting as much holy damage as it should. It kind of feels like it's a bug to where it should just get a lot more just added on holy damage, and it's not really benefiting much of the faith stats either. Like, you're honestly better off going into strength than faith to actually boost the damage, and also it doesn't actually work with things like the Shard of Alexander. The projectile portion just does not get a damage boost. It does actually get a damage boost at closer range when you hit with the weapon directly, but this part doesn't really do much damage. The whole purpose of it is to potentially like stance break quicker or like stun lock, which the whole combo does do 20 stance damage, 10 for the projectile, 10 for the actual weapon, which is not too crazy. I feel like the major benefit is to be able to like just stop enemies from regenerating poise as soon as they go a bit further away from you, because it is really quick and easy to use. But if this weapon did just have a better fate scaling and this thing actually work with the Shadow of Alexander, I would like it a lot more, and it potentially even be an A tier and probably even number 2 on this list. Now the skill also does have the same innate properties as Law of Regression spell, that it does this completely nullify and dispel all different types of buffs and debuffs that the enemy does have inflicted upon themselves, which this is definitely going to be meant for PvP, because in PvE, this is honestly more of a downside, because there are hardly any enemies or bosses that actually do buff themselves, and there's going to be a lot more instances to where you actually are proccing a debuff. So if you're using things like Poison, Scarlet Rot, proccing Frost, using things like the Sword of Darkness debuff or Grail's Roar, all of these debuffs are just going to be removed if you hit the boss or enemy with this skill, and that is just definitely not going to be a good thing, and it kind of limits the build creation that this thing actually does have. So I kind of wish it didn't really have that like whole removing the debuff type of effect, especially when it comes to things like status effects. And if it did work with things like the Shadow of Alexander and had a better fate scaling, I would have valued it a lot more, but unfortunately I can only really put it into the B tier. Number 2, the RELLANA'S Twin Blades, which is a paired type of light greatsword, to which when you two-hand it, you actually gain the power stancing light greatsword combo, which as I talked about, I typically don't really like that much, as the movesets don't hit simultaneously. It can still pair nicely with the multi-hit talismans and output a decent amount of DPS, but I would just much rather have it two-handed, as the two-handed combos are like basically just as fast as a straight sword, but just offer you more damage and just have much better combo potential. Now, thankfully, this power sensing combo actually does work a little bit better compared to like the regular power sensing combo that the light greatswords have, because for some reason when you actually combo in like the heavy attacks into the light attacks, it's a lot more seamless and fluid with the RELLANA'S Twin Blades compared to this like regular power sensing light greatswords for some reason. Now the thing is with these weapons, the one in your left hand is actually doing some split fire damage and the one in your right hand is doing some split magic damage, and actually does have scalings in all 4 different stats: strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith. So it does perform very similar to things like the Sword of Night and Flame, but I'm probably just going to prefer the Sword of Night and Flame a bit better, because it actually gets better scalings in faith and intelligence and does have the better skill in my opinion. Because for this weapon, surprisingly enough, it actually scales better off strength and dexterity. So if you actually want to maximize weapon damage, you're going to have to spec into that. But if you want to maximize skill damage, you have to spec into intelligence and faith. So I think this weapon is going to perform much better at higher levels. Now, as for its skill, Moon and Fire Stance, it actually is still very solid. And as of a few patches ago, this weapon has gotten a lot better, especially alongside the RELLANA'S Cameo Talisman. It actually can be an extremely powerful option. The fire-based version can actually just do more damage and more stance damage, but it does involve you having to be at closer ranges, and you are stuck in a longer animation with not much hype armor, but it can stun lock a lot of enemies, and against larger bosses, if all that fire-based projectiles and AoEs actually land, you're definitely going to be doing a large amount of damage. And as for the magic-based version, they're just very quick projectiles that can just do okay amounts of damage. The entire combo can actually perform pretty nicely, but I think the major benefit of this magic skill is just to be able to hit enemies really quickly. If you have those small openings at a distance, you could use it as a way to just stop enemies from regenerating their stance meter. So it is useful for a bunch of different reasons, but I still think it's a bit outclassed by the Sword of Night and Flame, as both the fire version and magic version can just do more damage in a faster animation and just be more efficient. But I think the RELLANA'S Twin Blade skills actually complement each other a little bit better, as one's going to be fast and quick and hit at a further distance, where the other one's going to be a bit slower and better for like stun locking and hitting larger bosses. And also another downside about the RELLANA'S Twin Blades is that for some reason it actually gets lower amounts of critical damage compared to all the other light greatswords. I don't really know why that's the case, but the motion values are just a lot slower compared to all the other ones. And even if you account for the split damage going through defenses on critical hits, it still gets the lowest amount of damage. And as number 1, the MILADY, which is the lone infusible light greatsword in the game. And it's going to be the best one for a plethora of different reasons. It's the lightest one, it has the lowest requirements, you can just get like the most damage as it can be infused, and paired alongside a bunch of different types of buffs. It pairs well with basically every single infusion, doesn't matter what it is. Flame Art, Sacred, Cold, Keen, even Heavy infused, it performs perfectly. If you are like at lower levels, I recommend just going with a strength build and two-handing it. But being that you get it in the DLC, you're more likely than not going to be at higher levels, so a dexterity build might just be better anyway. But the main reason why I am going to put it at number 1 is because of Wing Stance. Wing Stance, as I mentioned earlier in the video, is like a top 5 skill in this game, and paired alongside the RELLANA'S Cameo, it can just make for a broken ass build. The light attacks can stun lock enemies and just output high stance damage. It can combo into the heavy attack, and this entire combo can do like 45 stance damage and not consume much FP and lunge really far. and give you access to both standard damage and piercing damage. Like, it's such a flawless skill that just complements the weapon perfectly. And also, if you just wanted to make a build around just like the light greatsword moveset, the Milady is just going to be the best one. If you like those heavy attack combos or the running attack combos into the light attacks, it's just going to be very good with the Milady. Also, if you wanted to go with a guard countering build, the Milady is the best option, as you can infuse it with things like Cragblade and its output amazing damage. Like, I kind of see the light greatswords as I see like the twin blades, and that these weapons are going to be obvious pairings alongside the multi-hit talismans. But the thing is, the Milady just probably has more versatility and it's going to perform perfectly fine even if you don't have the multi-hit talismans. So yeah, the light greatsword category is an amazing one, and I think the Milady is just one of the best weapons in the entire game, definitely deserving of a high S tier. Okay, that's now done and completed. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. The next DLC weapon category I am going to cover is probably going to be either the thrusting shields or maybe like the singular throwing blade. I might make a whole dedicated video just based on that. Just let me know what you would rather see. And also do follow me on Twitch as well, as I'm live there every single day doing a bunch of challenge runs and testing out all these different types of weapons to just help me gain more knowledge and talking about these weapons. But yeah, thanks for watching. Catch you guys around. Bye.